Well, Casey here with CL Creative, where I'm teaching you web design and Webflow one video at a time. And today we're going to talk about how to integrate Swiper.js into your Webflow project. And particularly, we're going to look at how to integrate into your Webflow project utilizing Webflow CMS as that which is driving the content. This is not something that you can do natively with Webflow Slider. It will not connect to the CMS. You have to use some sort of workaround. And instead of using a workaround, we might as well just use one of the best sliders that is out there, Swiper.js. And so I'm going to talk to you, or I'm going to show you how to integrate this into your Webflow project. I'm going to provide you with the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript. We're going to talk about some of the gotchas and some of the caveats that you have to be aware of when you are integrating this into your Webflow project. And I'm going to give you just some general tips on how you can do this. I'll going to provide you also with a very detailed guide with all of the code that I'm going to be walking you through. And that's going to be linked down below to a blog post that I have written for this. So let's jump into the project and let's integrate Swiper into Webflow. All right, well, here we are in the computer, and I want to show you just a couple of things before we really get started. This is what we're going to be building, just a simple slider that slides whenever you click these buttons. You can also drag it on the desktop and certainly swipe it on the other views as well. It has autoplay feature, so every 25 seconds there's an autoplay. But if you're interested in this, you can put your mouse over it and it will stop the autoplay, as well as we have a little bit of custom pagination going here, and you can actually click on this to move it around as well. And then you can also use the keyboard to go between slides. So it's a little bit more customized than just your normal slider, and it's also CMS driven. I guess that's the other thing, but it's not that much. So here is Swiper's documentation. If you go back to this website right here, and there's a lot of cool things that you can do. You can see some of these things that you can do with Swiper. But in order to get to this point where we're doing some of these things, we need to understand how just to integrate Swiper into our project and to just getting it working like it's a regular slider. So we head over to the docs here. We're going to click on this Swiper core API. This is what we're going to be using. And you're going to notice that you have some HTML that you need to set up in your project. So we're going to set up the Swiper as kind of the main wrapping div. And I'm going to talk about that when we jump into the project, how we need to change this a little bit in Webflow. Let me go back over there. And then you have your Swiper wrapper, and then you've got your slides. You've got pagination if you want to have that, as well as your buttons. And if you want to have a scroll bar, you can have that as well. So let's jump into the project. Or before we do, let me just show you that I do have this blog post that I've written. It has everything that we're going to be talking about in this video, and it's all written out for you. All the caveats, all the code, everything that I'm doing, everything that I've changed, every decision that I've made that is not kind of like the default. And you're just going to be able to go in and read through all of this, grab the CSS, grab the JavaScript, put this in your project, and be able to have a slider working just like mine is working. So wanted to share that with you, and I'll link that down below. So let's jump into the designer, and you're going to see that same setup, right? I've got Swiper, I've got the wrapper, I've got the slider, I've got my arrows right here. They're wrapped inside of this arrow wrapper so that I can control where they're located. And then I've got pagination. Now I didn't use the scroll bar on this particular one. So that's what I have. Now, a couple caveats here, particularly when using the CMS to drive your slider. If you're not going to use the CMS to drive your slider, you can totally set it up just like this. But you need to put the buttons and the pagination inside of this Swiper wrapper. But with the CMS, you can't do that. So Webflow does not allow you to add additional elements inside of a CMS collection list that is not part of that CMS collection list, right? Like you can only add in the collection list wrapper, and then the actual list, and then the item, and that's all that you can add. And then you can add whatever you want inside of the item, but you can't add anything extra inside of the actual wrapper. So what I did instead is I created this Swiper component, And inside of that component, I put my collection list. And then you can notice that outside of that, I have my buttons here, and then I have my pagination. And the reason I did that is because this pagination in particular, out of the box, is going to be position absolute. Now I've changed it to position relative so I can style it a little bit different, but out of the box is going to be position absolute, and it needs to be absolute to something instead of being absolute to the section or to the body. And so I put this as position relative in order to make sure that I'm containing that pagination how I want. So that's just one thing to take note of, that this is taking the place somewhat of the swiper wrapper that you saw in the documentation, simply because I'm using a collection list with this inside of Webflow project. So, all right, that is, what you need to do, right? You need to come in, you need to throw a collection list on the page, and then you need to name it Swiper. Then you need to name your collection wrapper needs to be named Swiper. Your collection list needs to be named Swiper Wrapper. Your collection item needs to be named Swiper Slide. And then you put whatever you want inside of this slide. I'm just putting some images in there because I just want to show some images from my portfolio. So this is just going to be a slider on my portfolio so I can just show some of my work quickly. So you need to do that. Then you need to add some buttons to the page if you want, or you can use swipers, just kind of buttons. So they are going to go ahead and put buttons on there for you if you want to let them do that. If you don't, then you need to put your own buttons. Now, one of the things that you're going to notice if you jump back over here, and this cost me a ton of time, you're going to notice right here that they are recommending, if you need navigation buttons, then you need to put them in your HTML and you need to name them Swiper Button Previous. If you put this in your HTML, so like if we just straight up named these buttons right here, Swiper Button Previous, without, adding this additional, name to it, portfolio, then what's going to happen is whenever Swiper loads the page, it's actually going to load their kind of default buttons. And it's going to drive you crazy because if you want custom buttons like I have here, you're going to want to get rid of those. And you're going to try all kinds of things. You're going to put your own buttons on the page, like I put my own buttons on the page here. And what's going to happen is you're actually going to have these buttons and you're going to have Swipers buttons on the page. And you're not going to be able to get rid of them until you change the name. So this took me a while to figure out. Actually, I had to go and look at a bunch of other projects that had custom buttons. And one of the things I noticed is that they did not use the absolute naming convention that Swiper tells you to use. They added a different name there. And so that's exactly what I did. And as soon as I did that, Swiper's kind of default navigation buttons disappeared, and I was able to use just my own buttons. So if you're going to add in custom buttons like I've added here, make sure to name them differently. It will save you so much time because it just took me forever to figure that out. And I was beating my head against the wall, and I finally got it. And I was like, that is so simple. Why don't they mention that in their documentation? And they don't. So you just have to figure that out. And here's me saving you a good 30 minutes to an hour or so of your life and, some headaches. All right. So add these to the page, and that is just kind of be your setup. Now let's move into the CSS. Now, I typically would not put everything in an embed, but it's just going to be easier for me to walk you through what's going on here with this inside of an embed. So the first thing that we need to make sure that we do is we need to head back over here to Swiper, and we're going to go to Get Started. Now we're going to use the CDN link in order to get started. So this use Swiper CDN. So you're going to go to Docs, Get Started, and you're going to grab this link. You're going to want to grab this one right here, and then you're going to paste that into either right here into the head of your project, or as I've done, you're going to put a custom, or you're going to put an embed on the page, and then inside of this embed, you're going to paste this link right here. Now, you want to make sure, you notice that I have the CSS and the JavaScript embed separate. You want to make sure to do that so that whatever CSS we put in here is going to be rendered on our designer on the canvas. Now, if you can certainly put this CSS in sort of the page settings, but it's not going to be rendered on the canvas inside of Webflow's designer on the non-published site. So that's why I put it inside of an embed, in the same thing with the JavaScript, though it's not going to be rendered on the page either. But this way I can copy and paste this to other pages and just make some changes where I need to without having to, go in and copy multiple times. So that's why I put the JavaScript here as well, just to kind of keep it all contained within this swiper component, which I can change, or I can create a component from and put it on other pages if I want it to look exactly like this, and just change out the CMS that it's being connected to, and I'd have another slider that looks exactly like this on another page on my website if I wanted to do that without having to make any sort of changes. So first thing, put the link there. Then you're going to go through and you're going to style these things. So I have this component. Again, I've changed that to position relative. It's going to make sure that I'm containing any absolute items in the swiper pagination. Is out of the box default position absolute, and so we need a wrapper to contain that. Now I have my just normal swiper. There's nothing in here, but you could change this. You could take off overflow hidden if you want, and it's just going to show the full swiper. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that because we're going to see in the JavaScript that we're able to control how many slides we're able to see, and that's kind of going to negate that. Then I've got my swiper slide. And the only thing that I have going on this swiper slide is I've got a border radius applied to this. Now I'm using variables inside of Webflow. I'll show you how to grab that. So if you're using the variables panel, you can come over here and you can put in all these different variables. And say you want to use these variables in your custom code, like I have done this border radius. All you have to do is click on this three dots and do copy CSS. Then you can go back to, your embed. And right here on this border radius part, you can just paste it in. And so it pasted that in. So if I delete that actually, so you can actually see that being pasted in, it will paste in the CSS that you need in order for this to, work properly. Then I've got overflow clip going, so that way we'd actually see that border radius that's taking place there. If we move on into the actual slide, this is going to be the image. I've got that set at width 100%, height 100%, my cover, or the object fit is going to be cover here. So that way it's going to fill the whole deal. And then I've set an aspect ratio. This aspect ratio is a little bit different than maybe your normal aspect ratio would go, but this is the aspect ratio that makes sense for these particular slides that I have in here, so that they're showing full width. So you may have a different aspect ratio. And let me show you where I got that aspect ratio for, in case you need to get that aspect ratio yourself. So I went to the published site, I do inspect, and then after I do the inspect, you're going to notice that on this image, if I just hover over it here, there's going to be this rendered size, and then there's going to be, this is the problem with having something that is moving. Let me see if I can get this to come up here. Well, I'll go look at it over here. How about that? You're going to see on the actual image, you're going to see this width and you're going to see this height right here. And so this is what I took, and I made that into an aspect ratio. And the way that you do that is you look at this and you say, okay, this is 627 on the height. So that will be 6.27. And then on the width, this is 837. So you just say 8.37. So that's how I got that custom aspect ratio. And then typically, you would click on ratio here. You would go to custom, and then you would enter that in, right? So you would enter in like 8.37, and then you would enter in 6. Whatever that was, 31. And that's going to give you, your custom aspect ratio for this particular image that is inside of there. So if we jump back over here, I just wrote that out in the CSS for us, 8.4 and 6.3. So that's the same thing as if I was to do it over here. Then we've got our arrows. And so we've got this wrapper. So it's this wrapper right here, swiper arrow wrapper. I've just basically got that at display flex. I have a top margin of 1 rem, and then I have a gap there just to space these out a little bit. And then on the mobile view, I've actually gotten rid of those. And that's because the pagination got to be a little bit long, the dots, the bullets. So I've just put these at display none on the mobile version. Then the actual button itself, I have this at position relative. Then I have a z-index of 11, and I have the z-index of 11 here because the swiper pagination gets a z-index of 10. So I wanted to make sure that there was no conflict at all with my pagination and my buttons. And so this is another thing you need to watch out for. So I just went ahead and made each of these buttons at a z-index of 11 so that the pagination would never overlap it and I wouldn't be able to utilize those buttons because this was happening in one of my setups in the past. Then I just have a display flex, overflow clip so I can get the roundedness there. I've just set the width at 3 rem, height at 3 rem, and I have my aspect ratio at 1:1. I'm essentially just creating a square here so that way I can, make it where it is going to be a circle. So I've got center aligned, and I've got my overflow clip going on there. All right. Then also have this button on hover. I'm just changing the opacity a little bit. Now here I have a background color of blue gradient. This is just something that I have in my project where you're able to add just a quick background color to something by throwing on another combo class. So that's why there's nothing written here. And then the same thing for the other button. Exactly the same. Then I've got my arrows. And then I have my pagination. And one of the things that I did is I changed the default pagination to position relative. And the reason I did that is because I wanted it to be below. So if we jump back over here to the published site, I actually wanted my pagination to be right below these arrows. And when it was absolute, it was jumping up to be in line here with these arrows. And so I needed it to actually be within the flow. And so that's why I did that. And then also on mobile version, I noticed that, whenever I have those disappear, there's nothing here that's blocking these from jumping all the way up. And so they were like way up inside of my image. And I needed to be able to apply a margin top to these. So that's why I also made them position relative here as well. So if we jump back over here, you're going to see that this right here, this swiper pagination, it has a margin top of 2 rem when we get down to the mobile version. And then I have my bullets, and these bullets right here just have, the colors again from the variables panel. And that's really about it that I have going on with those. All right, so let's jump over here into the JavaScript. And so if we look at this JavaScript here, again, we're going to get the CDN link, which is going to be this one right here. We're going to copy this from docs, get started, and we're going to put that in our project. I have that already prepared for you, but in a case in the future, if this changes to a different version. And then I'm making sure that this is initializing, so I'm calling window.webflow, here to make sure that everything is initialized and everything is getting pushed. So that will just wrap your entire code base here. Then what I'm doing is we got to initialize swiper. So we do that by adding in this swiper variable here and calling a new swiper to initialize it. Now here's where things would change if you copied this from Swiper's documentation, right? I have created this new variable swiper portfolio, and I am again targeting, if you notice here, swiper, the combo class swiper is portfolio. So that's important. If you're going to add a combo class here and you want this to be different from other swipers, then you need to make sure that you add in this combo class here so that it knows which swiper to target. And I like to keep my naming conventions nice and tight so that way I know exactly what's going on. And so I've also changed the name here to make sure that I know that this is the swiper for my portfolio. Now, some of the things that I've added in, and this first part here is really just going to be kind of like the initial, structure or initial things that you would add to your swiper project. They're not going to be nested inside of another object here at all. They're just going to be nested. They're just going to be inside of the initialization section for the swiper JS slider. So what I've done, loop true. I've also disabled auto height because I want to utilize my own height. I want to utilize the aspect ratio and all of that stuff. So I've disabled auto height. The effect is slide. This is my default, but I just put this here so that you could see. And for me, in my future use, I don't have to jump into the documentation. But there are other things that you can do. You can fade this. You can do a cube, cover flow, flip. You can do creative cards. Some of these may require some additional setup, so I'd certainly recommend looking at the documentation if you're going to do that. I've also done a grab cursor, so that's where you see, here you see how it changes to the hand, and it looks like I'm actually grabbing that slide. So I've added that in just so that people know whenever they hover over that, hey, we're actually making some changes here. All right, now some of the additional things I've added in is autoplay. So you just create this object. Everything needs to be inside of the swiper kind of main, wrapper, if you will, or so this is just nested inside of that. And then there are going to be a number of different options that you can utilize. So if we head back over to the swiper documentation, I'll show you, what I mean here. So if we go to autoplay, you're going to notice that you're going to have an autoplay area, and then you're going to have a number of different parameters or a module, if you will, really kind of like an object that we're going to nest some things inside of. But what you have is you have autoplay, right? And then you have all of these different parameters that you can add. And then if you look at, say, pagination, right? You've got pagination, and then you have all of these different parameters that you can add. And the way you read this is, if we go back to autoplay, because this is the one I'm going to show you, this right here, autoplay, again, you're going to nest it inside of this swiper instance, and you're going to do autoplay, right? You're going to put your colon, you're going to open up your curly brackets, and then you're going to put in all of those different parameters that you see here. Now, this default is going to tell you, what this is. And then this is going to tell you what type it is here. So we want to make sure that we look at the default, and we're not going to add stuff into our project that is not the default. So if you just want autoplay at 3000, you want to really control the delay at all, well, just put in autoplay. You don't even have to put in a delay parameter. If you want to add in pause on mouse enter, which is a default of false, well, then you need to add that parameter in, which is exactly what I did. So I changed the delay to 2500. I wanted to be able to have that. I disabled on interaction, right? So I want it to keep playing. So when I put my mouse up there, I want this to keep on playing. And then I have pause on mouse enter. I've set that to true. So it's just simple as that, right? You're looking through here and you're seeing what is it that I want to manipulate on my slider. There are, just parameters for everything. And then you just go in here and you look and you see, well, what can I do? Now, some of this we're not going to get into because we don't necessarily need that in this particular one, but in other more advanced setups, you would need to look at the methods and the events. But for our intents purposes, that's not what we need to do for this particular slider. So the same thing with the keyboard, right? You just do keyboard, create a module here for that, or open up an object here for that. And then I'm going to enable that with true. And then I've also added in, I found this other, parameter so that the keyboard will only work whenever this is in view. So if you're here in view, the keyboard is working. But then if I move up here where swiper is not in view, I'm pressing the keyboard and it's not working at all. It's still auto playing, but it's not, the keyboard's not working. If I bring this back into view, the keyboard is working. Just a little touch there. And then I've got my pagination here. So we open up that pagination object. Now here's where you need to tell Swiper a couple of things. And one of the things that I'm telling Swiper is that, look, the elements, they're going to have this class. Swiper pagination is portfolio. And that's going to allow me to make some styling changes to those pagination elements. I'm telling it what type it is. It's bullets. And then I'm also passing in this other parameter that's saying that it's going to be clickable. The same thing with navigation. This is another one that you need to make sure that you change, particularly if you're going to have custom navigation. If you're not going to have custom navigation, then you would just go with the out-of-box setup, which you would just remove portfolio. It would just be swiper button next and then swiper button previous. If you're going to have navigation, you have to have this in your JavaScript. And if you're going to have custom navigation, you need to make sure you're telling Swiper what to look for. What is going to be the next element? What's going to control the previous element? And so that's what we have added here. And then we have, and this is another thing that you need to think through, particularly with CSS, and we learned that our styles cascade down from the desktop. And so whatever style we put at the desktop breakpoint is going to cascade all the way down the mobile unless we change that. Well, with Swiper, it's different. It starts at the mobile breakpoint and it cascades up. So whatever is there at mobile, it's going to cascade all the way up to desktop. So this right here is just going to be your base breakpoint. Whatever is here is going to be on mobile, and it's going to cascade all the way up unless you change it. Now, I want to have different slides on different breakpoints and all of those different things that are there. So you notice that you have this. I just have this first, but I've explicitly gone in just so that I know, so that I'm not getting confused here. I've explicitly gone in and I've added in all of the different breakpoints where I want this swiper to change. And I started at 320 because in Webflow, that's kind of where we start. So if you click right here, you're going to notice that the mobile breakpoint is 320, and then you're going to go up from there to 768, and then you're going to go up from there, to your base breakpoint here, which is really going to be 992. So that's exactly what I have set up here. So I've got both my mobile and my mobile landscape. I have one slide per view, and I have a space between of 16 pixels. Now, you need to do this in pixels, and that's exactly what I've done here. Then I moved up here to my tablet breakpoint at 768. It's going to be 1.5 slides at 32. And I could have kept that, and it would cascade up to the desktop, but I wanted it to have a little bit more space between, and then just explicitly call this out. So that way I'm not getting confused and not taking anything for granted. I can look at this code and I can read it, and it works. So the desktop is going to change to 1.5 slides. So if we just go and look at that, what you see is you just see half of this slide. So essentially I wanted people to know that, hey, there are other slides that are coming up in this view, and maybe they get intrigued. Maybe they want to see that slide. And so they wait a little bit longer to click through to that. Now you can have 2 slides or 3 slides or 4 slides showing at a time. You can have all kinds of different slides showing here, or you can just have one slide showing. So if I move down, here's going to be kind of maybe our iPad. I've still got the 1.5 slides. Now, if you move down into that, this would represent maybe the mobile landscape view. So you see there's just one slide showing. And then if we move all the way down a little bit further into mobile, I got rid of that so that way somebody can just swipe. But these pagination buttons show you that you are indeed, swiping. All right, and that's really it. That's all that you need to do to get everything set up inside of your Webflow project. Now, we walked through a lot here. Go and check out that blog post that I wrote, this one right here. I'm going to link this down below. Where did it go? I'm going to link this down below, and this is going to have all of the code that you need. Now, again, you could just copy and paste the CSS. You could just copy and paste the JavaScript right into your project, just as long as you use the same naming conventions that I have used here. Everything will work right out of the box. You can remove the combo classes if you want. You can add in your own combo classes, or you can use this CSS as a reference to style your own CSS inside of Webflow. I just found that it's just easier for me to provide this to you in this way rather than trying to take all these different screenshots and show all this different stuff of the designer view. Webflow does a great job of allowing you to develop visually, but it makes it a little bit harder to share some of those settings with other people. So that's why I've done it in the way that I've done it here. Hopefully you find that helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to drop those down below, and I'll try to respond to those questions.